Welcome to A Cup of Cold Water's program on cardiovascular disease, the silent killer. I'm joined by Dr. John Kniff, who is an expert in the field of internal medicine and a hospitalist at Stanford and Washington Hospital as well. So Dr. Kniff and I were talking a bit before the break about cardiovascular health, and how does exactly diabetes fit in there? Does it also make cardiovascular disease, does it make heart disease worse? What role do the two play together?
The biggest problem with diabetes is that it exacerbates plaque buildup. And so if you're the type of person who's going to have any kind of cholesterol buildup on your arteries, diabetes makes it much, much worse. It makes it worse in the big arteries, but also the small arteries. If you've ever seen a diabetic who's had their foot chopped off, that's one of the problems, is even in the small arteries, it clogs it up and it doesn't get enough flow. And that can, cause the blindness, the kidney problems, basically the peripheral vascular disease that leads to a lot of the really horrific things that people with end-stage diabetes have. But at the end of the day, most diabetics will die of a heart attack.
Wow. So definitely there's a relationship there. So what types of things, because it sounds like in the early stages it's pretty silent as well. Should somebody who's maybe at risk for diabetes, or should somebody be looking for to see if they do have diabetes?
It's interesting because blood pressure, almost anybody can control their own blood pressure. We can all have access to a blood pressure cuff, or go to a Walgreens and get your blood pressure cuff and exercise and watch your salt. Diabetes, not that way. Unfortunately, diabetes, you need to work with a professional. You need to work with a physician, nurse practitioner, because you will not feel it if your blood glucose is up. It's not anything, it's not your fault. Again, it runs in families. It is associated with people putting on more weight, but plenty of skinny people can have diabetes too. And mostly here we're talking about the adult diabetes, not the juvenile diabetes. Okay,
the kids may be born with. So what are some of the common signs early on that somebody might experience?
Early on, if you had to, the most common presentation is what happens is people get very thirsty. Because what's happened is their glucose level is so high in their body that they're actually urinating out. It's causing increased urination. So they're going to the bathroom all the time, they're very thirsty. And losing weight, actually, surprisingly, right when they're very sick. But what will happen is the glucose level will go higher and higher in the body, and at some point in time the body can't handle it. And the person would die of that.
Wow, okay, so definitely people being thirsty, and if they're urinating a lot, because
urinating a lot and being thirsty is your key. That might be, well, it is time to check your glucose right away.
And what's the best way for people to sort of enter into that healthcare system? What should they do in terms of interacting with a doctor, and the questions they should ask when they
I think everybody who's at risk, and that would be anybody who has family member with diabetes, because that really raises your risk. If you're overweight, and probably at around 40, everyone should be checked for a glucose level in the morning, because you kind of don't want to do it right after you ate a big meal. You want to see what your glucose level is in the morning after you haven't eaten overnight.
So that raises a good point. Do you feel that diabetics really do crave sugar? Because many of them say it's very hard for them to turn away carbohydrates or processed food, or sometimes even sweets.
Yeah, I have the same problem myself. So I don't think it's anything. I don't think there's anything special. It's just they have the bad luck of a lot of the genetics. Usually, is what gets you in trouble with diabetes. It's same people have the same weight problem, the same situation, but two different genetic backgrounds. One person will have diabetes, one person won't.
Right. So maybe if people have like you said, a family predisposition, or they know that they may be at risk because they're overweight, they should go to the doctor when they're younger and not wait.
Yeah, because the last thing you want to do is have years of all the problems of diabetes before you get a chance to actually, work on the disease. And unfortunately, it's you don't get cured from diabetes. You have it for the rest of your life, but you learn to manage it.
You manage it. Is it true that some patients can actually get off their meds maybe earlier in the course?
Absolutely. There's plenty of people who, lose weight, get off their medications, and then never have to take a medication again.
Right. So clearly the medication piece is very important, that patients utilize them but realize that there are some things they can do on their own as well.
Absolutely.
And then any other type of checkups that they should get, their eyes or feet?
Yeah, I mean, I think once you get diagnosed with diabetes, boy, then you're part of the healthcare system.
Oh,
so
okay.
then they have to get your eyes checked every year. They have to make sure you're not having all the things that you have problems with. Kidney function needs to be monitored pretty closely. And then the blood pressure really has to be under control.
And so what's the state of art today with respect to checking blood sugar? Because I know a lot of patients really feel uncomfortable about having to stick themselves.
Yeah, we still are sticking themselves. They're getting some interesting things where you have a watch that can actually just tell you minute to minute your glucose level. But it's still in the kind of testing stages. But they will have that out pretty soon. So you just wear a watch and it'll be able to tell you what your glucose is at all times.
And do you think that people should write this down and go over it with their doctor, or maybe have a family member help them keep a track?
They've actually done studies where if they ask people, for example, blood pressure, but glucose is the same. If the doctor, everybody will remember your best number.
Okay.
So if you don't write it down,
right.
You're like, oh, my glucose was 80. Well, it was 80 one time last month, and in the reality it was usually 150. But you're going to say it was 80.
Right.
And doctors do the same thing.
Sure.
So it's, what are you going to say? You want to look the best, but that's why you have to write it down. It has to be in a journal, and it has to be kind of data. And you say, okay, well, this is what we have. This is reality. What are we going to do to improve it? Because it is, talking about silent killers, diabetes is also the exact one that you can have no symptoms, yet you're actually dying of the disease.
Wow. And so things that family members can do to encourage or help their loved ones.
It's a group effort, because the reality is, everybody knows if you sit there and watch someone overeat and has that extra dessert, and you can't have it. It's like smoking in front of a smoker. It's not fair. You really have to, as a family, kind of decide, get the processed food out, get that high caloric stuff out, and start eating healthier. And the exact mechanics of that, the reality is we all know it, but it's the doing that's hard.
Do you think that stress and maybe other things that people are going through, maybe grief or loss or self-esteem issues, kind of drive people to
I think always, everybody reacts to stress a different way, but there's certainly a subset of our country that when they're stressed or depressed eats. And I think we all know somebody like that. And that's especially dangerous when people have diabetes.
And you touched on the kids, which is always very sensitive and near and dear to people's hearts. What would be the recommendations for the schools and lunches and when kids are out with their friends at various places for parties?
Again, you remember the kind of the size portions we had when we were kids, and you go out to a restaurant. Well, now it's a plate 2 times bigger than the kid's head. I remember we went to Minnesota, and we were there, and my wife's family was like, well, you can't get any dessert till you finish your plate, which made sense, but there's probably enough for 4 kids on that plate.
Wow.
So my wife told my daughter, don't do that. And just when you go out to eat, look at the size portions, and then look at the kid, and it's absurd. How we, as a society, undo this, I don't know. But you do have to realize all the sugar cereals, all the pizza every day at school, it's going to take its toll.
It's going to take its toll. Do you think that the fast food industry has done this, supersized and increased the amount of sugar content that exists?
It's interesting because I always think of the fast food as a struggle for survival. There's probably 10,000 fast food chains, and the one that could give you the highest, fattest, one. And so maybe that's McDonald's or Burger King. But they have no concern for your health. They're not actively trying to kill you. They just want to give you whatever you want. And I think whatever you want, unfortunately, turns out to be salty, fatty, and very addicting.
And do you think, some people have said that we even have a sort of a natural tendency towards that, the sugary, the fatty, that there's some hormones or some liking that we have that gives us really, the smell of fried foods is very attractive.
Again, remember 10,000 years ago, nobody died of a heart attack, right? You tried to get as much food as you could, and you just tried to stay alive. It wasn't until the last couple hundred years that people managed to die of a heart attack. This is a new phenomenon.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think our bodies are built to eat as much as we can.
Right. But it may be a disease of abundance, having
I don't think our bodies weren't designed for the world we live in. And the big challenge locally with our families as a nation is how do we undo this?
Right. So what advice, as we're wrapping up, would you give to a family that may be watching that has 2 kids at home that want to eat junk food all the time? And
you have to do it as a group.
Okay.
You have to prepare your own meals. You have to remember how your family used to eat vegetables. It has to have food. It has to, like chicken, vegetables. That's it. All the processed, the potato chips, I mean, when we were kids, nobody had ice cream every night.
Right.
that was a treat.
Right.
But now we do. So we have to go back to that, and you have to start exercising. You have to make 30, 40 minutes of exercise part of your life.
So maybe put down some of the video games and
put down the
go
video
out and
games,
do things as a family.
Take a walk.
Activities, museums, and things like that would be very helpful. So. No, that's very, very helpful advice, and I hope that our listeners
goes under the easier said than done. I think everyone listening to this will tell you that.
Right, exactly.
Unfortunately, there's no easy way around it. There's no pill to make you lose weight. We've gone through a lot of pills, and we have not found a safe one. Once you get diabetes, the majority of the medications make you put on weight.
Oh, really? Okay.
Rather than lose it, so it becomes even harder.
Right.
A lot of people out there with diabetes will agree with that. So.
Wow.
Really, it's better to prevent ever having diabetes than once you get it. It's a lot more challenging.
Sure. Wow. So that's a good point that you raised, that some of the medications, how does that work, that the medications actually increase people's weight?
It's a little complicated, but basically you have insulin resistance. So all the medications are about increasing the insulin in your body, but the trouble is insulin is all about making fat, storing fat, so it's just a tough situation because you got somebody who's overweight and you're giving them medication that makes them put on weight.
Right.
But you got to do it because you're trying to keep their glucose levels down so they don't have a heart attack.
Right.
So
wow.
That's where focusing on the kids so that they don't get into that situation is a better way to go.
Right. So definitely watching people's diet, watching sort of the shopping, and kind of like you said, getting back to basics and making food at home, and maybe also displaying for your kids healthy behavior of eating vegetables more, which probably all of us can do as adults.
It's a,
which is good.
Again,
these are all good strategies.
You got to bring it back into our life, and obviously not smoking is the other. Kind of goes without saying that kind of doubles and triples your risk of blood pressure and diabetes if you smoke.
Certainly. Well, I mean, all very helpful information, and I hope that our audience can find some tips and some commitment as we start off the new year with the idea of really trying to improve people's health and appreciate the fact that cardiovascular disease and even diabetes are very silent and subtle, but still very dangerous in their ability to cause heart attacks and even death, and some of it's preventable. So.
And on the plus side, very preventable.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Kniff.
I
appreciate you coming in this evening.